In Alabama, not all monsters live in the dark, and their stories are so disturbing they shook the nation. Now, these are the state's most notorious figures, waiting for the day their final sentence will be carried out. Donald Broadnax was born in 1961 in Birmingham, Alabama. His troubles started young. At just 16 years old, he took the life of a friend during an argument at the Elaton Village housing project. Broadnax fired several times, even reloading after the first shots. It took 3 months for authorities to find him. In 1978, he was convicted and sentenced to 99 years in prison. But that wasn't where his story ended. Broadnax was granted parole in 1986 and soon fell in with the wrong crowd again. He spent time around people involved in illegal activities and was caught with weapons, breaking the terms of his release. He was sent back to prison but later moved into a work release program in Alexander City, Alabama, where he worked as a painter. In 1995, Broadnax married Hector Jan Stamps, who was caring for her 3-year-old grandson, D'Angelo. On April 25, 1996, while still in the work release program, Broadnax picked them up. Later that day, their bodies were found at a cemetery in Birmingham. Hector had been shot several times, and the young boy had suffered fatal injuries. Broadnax faced 4 major charges, 2 for taking more than 1 life, 1 for an offense involving unlawful removal, and 1 for the loss of a child under 14. In June 1997, a jury found him guilty on all counts and recommended capital punishment. The judge approved that sentence on September 12, 1997. There is no public record of Broadnax ever showing regret. As of April 2025, he remains on row at Hollowman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama. The date for carrying out his sentence has not been set. In the next case, a father's love, meant to be unconditional, took a dark and horrifying turn. John Joseph Delas was born in 1983. Years later, Delas was held responsible for the loss of his 2 young children, 4-year-old Natalie and 3-year-old Chase. The unsettling story came to light months after the children were gone. In December 2010, their remains were found in wooded areas. Natalie in Alabama, Chase across the state line in Mississippi. Investigators quickly confirmed that their lives had been taken. Delas admitted his role, and scientific tests backed up the case against him. At the time, Delas was only 25 years old. He had a troubled personal life, with rocky relationships and a long history of problems. Some believed these struggles may have played a part in what happened, but no clear reason was ever given in court. Many questions were left unanswered. During the trial, Delas stayed calm as the jury read the verdict. He showed no emotion, no signs of regret, something that deeply unsettled everyone in the room. Prosecutors explained step by step how everything unfolded and how Delas tried to hide what he had done. His lawyers were not able to offer strong proof to change the outcome. In 2012, a jury found him guilty on 3 major charges connected to what happened. They recommended the harshest sentence allowed by law, and the judge agreed Delas would face that punishment by injection. As of April 2025, Delas is still being held in the section for men awaiting their final sentence at Hollowman Correctional Facility in Alabama. His case is under review in higher courts, but what about the woman who stood by his side and carried darkness of her own? Born in 1988 in Alabama, Heather Levo Keaton didn't enter motherhood by birth, but by choice. When she moved in with John Joseph Delas, she also entered the lives of his 2 young children, 4-year-old Natalie and 3-year-old Chase. She was not their biological mother, but over time, she became the adult figure they were forced to answer to. What followed was a slow, horrifying descent. Prosecutors would later reveal that the children endured relentless mistreatment over several months. The home became a place of fear and punishment. At the heart of the allegations was something especially disturbing. Heather Levo Keaton was accused of poisoning the children with antifreeze. According to the state, while Delas was the one who took their final breaths away, it was Heather who had laid the groundwork for what would come. To this day, no clear motive has ever surfaced. What was clear, however, was that the suffering endured by Natalie and Chase didn't happen overnight. it unfolded over time, and in silence. In May 2015, Heather Levo Keaton stood trial. A jury found her guilty on 2 counts. For 3-year-old Chase, they decided she meant to bring about his demise. For 4-year-old Natalie, they judged her actions reckless, but not intentional, so she faced a manslaughter charge. That split verdict was unusual. At sentencing, defense witnesses spoke about her depression and bipolar disorder. The prosecution questioned how much these conditions affected her choices. On August 20th, 2015, Judge Rick Stout gave her capital punishment for Chase's case by a chemical injection and set a 20-year prison term for Natalie's case. She was the first woman in Mobile County to receive that punishment. In 2020, her initial punishment was overturned because of a procedural mistake. A new hearing in 2021 brought the same outcome. In December 2021, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals upheld it. In June 2023, the U.S. Supreme Court chose not to look at the case. As of April 25, 2025, Heather Levo Keaton remains on the list for the chemical injection and has not gone through it. But the next name would become known across Alabama for a case that shook the state to its core. Thomas Dale Ferguson was born in 1973. On July 21, 1997, Harold Pugh and his young son Joey were reported missing in Colbert County, Alabama. What began as a search soon turned tragic. Their bodies were later found in Cane Creek, leaving behind a wave of grief and unanswered questions. Investigators soon pointed to Thomas Dale Ferguson and a small group of companions. According to authorities, the pair had lost their lives during a planned theft. Because 2 lives were lost in a single act, and one of them was a child. The case carried the highest level of severity under Alabama law. Ferguson faced multiple top-tier charges, each one tied to the seriousness of what had happened, the intentional nature, the fact that 2 people had been lost at once, and the especially age of the youngest victim. So what happened? Before we dive into the details, consider liking and subscribing for more stories like these. Ferguson and his group had stolen a truck. What followed was a fatal chain of events. The theft spiraled into something far worse, leaving lives shattered. At trial, his defense argued he had an intellectual disability and asked the court to spare him the harshest punishment. But the jury wasn't swayed. They found him guilty on all charges. When it came time to decide his fate, 11 out of 12 jurors pushed for life without parole. But the judge had other plans. He overruled the recommendation, pointing to the fatal outcome, and despite Ferguson's clean record and the fact that he had turned himself in, the judge imposed the ultimate sentence. Ferguson appealed over and over, but every court, from state to federal, shut him down. One by one, the doors closed, and the original sentence stood. Currently, Ferguson remains incarcerated at Hollowman Correctional Facility, awaiting the scheduling of his final sentence. The next case started as a plan to escape with stolen cash, but what unfolded on the water that day was far more brutal than anyone expected. Born on November 26, 1971 in Alabama, Michael Craig Maxwell's early life was marked by instability. He grew up in a financially disadvantaged household, frequently moving from place to place. In July 1997, Maxwell became involved in a plan with 4 other men to break into a bank. As part of their preparation, they needed vehicles for their escape. On July 20, 1997, Harold Pugh and his 11-year-old son, Joey, were fishing at Cane Creek in Colbert County, Alabama. When they returned to their truck, Maxwell and Ferguson confronted them. At gunpoint, they forced Harold and Joey back into their boat and took them downstream. Both father and son were shot twice in the head, and their bodies were later discovered floating in the creek. Maxwell and his accomplices then used the Pugh's truck and boat to further their plans. They later abandoned and burned the truck, attempting to destroy evidence. Following his arrest, Maxwell provided a detailed confession to law enforcement, admitting his role in the events. He was indicted on 4 capital-level charges, 2 for unaliving during a first-degree theft, 1 for causing multiple passings in a single event, and 1 for taking the life of a child under the age of 14. At the trial, witness after witness described what took place and shared details about Maxwell's history. His lawyers tried to explain his actions, but never offered a convincing reason. In the end, the jury determined he was responsible. The judge then gave him the highest penalty allowed by law. As of April 25, 2025, Maxwell is still held at Hollowman Correctional Facility in Alabama, waiting on the next steps in his case review. The next individual risked it all against gang members. Shaell Andre Jackson was born in 1978. He grew up in Montgomery, Alabama. When he was 19, a serious event changed his path. In 1997, Jackson and some friends had been drinking and wanted to get back at a gang member named Kokomo. They went to meet Lefrick Moore. During that meeting, someone fired a gun and Moore passed. Jackson first said he didn't know the others and hadn't been there, but witnesses and other proof showed he was involved. Police arrested him, and he was later found guilty. The trial drew a lot of attention. The jury said Jackson should spend the rest of his life behind bars with no chance of release. Judge William Gordon ignored their recommendation and gave Jackson the harshest sentence under state law. The judge pointed to Jackson's past record and what happened that night. This decision sparked debate about Alabama's rule, allowing judges to change a jury's choice in the most serious cases. Today, Jackson remains at Hollowman Correctional Facility in the section for people facing the harshest sentence. He is set to have his sentence carried out on May 1, 2025. Before that day, he told the staff, "I'm at peace. I'm ready to be at home. Let's ride, Warden." Topherus Johnson was born on February 8, 1973 in Birmingham. He grew up in the Pratt City and Ensley neighborhoods. He has one younger brother and 5 children. His family insists he has been wrongly accused. So, what is his story? Shortly after midnight on July 19, 1995, Deputy Sheriff William G. Hardy was working extra security at a hotel in Birmingham, Alabama. He was shot and passed away. The police investigation led to the arrest of Topherus Johnson. The shooting happened during an off-duty shift at the Crown Sterling Suites. At first, several people were questioned, but charges against most were dropped. Johnson and another man, Ardregus Ford, were tried separately. Ford went through 2 mistrials and was cleared. Johnson's case rested mainly on the testimony of Violet Ellison. She said she heard him admit to the shooting during a phone call from jail. At Johnson's 1998 trial, the jury voted 10-2 to find him guilty. He received the most severe penalty allowed. Critics point out there is no physical proof tying him to the scene. They also question how reliable the key witness really was. In 2017, lawyers from the Southern Poverty Law Center filed an appeal. They showed proof that Johnson was at a nightclub miles from the hotel when the shooting took place. They also revealed Ellison had received $5,000 for her testimony, information that wasn't shared with Johnson's defense team. The Alabama Court of Appeals ruled it couldn't be shown she knew about the payment when she spoke. The case has drawn a lot of attention. Former Alabama Attorney General Bill Baxley and Jefferson County District Attorney Danny Carr have both asked for a new trial. As of April 2025, Johnson is still held at Hollowman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama, waiting to learn what will happen next. No date has been set to carry out his penalty, and his lawyers are still working to get a new hearing. The next man crossed state lines and left stories of horror behind in each one. Born in 1973 in Miami, Oklahoma, Jeremy Bryan Jones grew up in a stable home. His parents split up when he was young, and his mother remarried soon after. His stepfather worked as a carpenter, and that helped the family live comfortably. He had a younger brother. They lived a typical middle-class life. Jones's illegal actions started in the early 1990s. He first faced charges for a non-consensual act, and later for possessing illegal substances. Over the years, he was arrested more than once and broke his probation several times. By 2004, he was hiding under the name John Paul Chapman to avoid police. His actions weren't limited to Oklahoma. Jones later said he had been linked to more than 20 cases where people lost their lives in states like Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and New Orleans. Not every claim has been confirmed. In September 2004, Alabama officers caught Jones in connection with the case of Lisa Nichols. She was found in Chunchilla with a gunshot injury that cost her life. Investigators showed that this incident included a non-consensual act, unwanted touching, breaking into her home, and taking her somewhere against her will. Under Alabama rules, those factors meant the case could carry the harshest sentence. At his trial, the court looked at his history and the statements he made about other fatal incidents. Prosecutors said his record and lack of regret meant he should receive the toughest punishment. His lawyers argued that some of his statements were not reliable and may have been made under pressure. After considering the evidence, the jury found him guilty of the capital charge. After the verdict, the court imposed its toughest sentence. Jones stays at Hollowman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama. Next is a home invasion that ended in the tragic passing of a singer and his wife. Jeffrey Lee was born in 1970. He grew up in an unstable home and got into trouble at a young age. By the time he turned 29, he had a record of convictions for theft, physical harm, and illegal substance offenses. Late one night in 1999, Lee and another person broke into singer Jimmy Ellis's house in Alabama. They meant to take valuables from them, but things went much worse. Ellis and his former wife, Elaine Thompson, passed from gunshot wounds. A third person, Helen King, was seriously hurt. The whole event unfolded in just a few minutes. Prosecutors said Lee planned the break-in ahead of time and was driven by money, with no concern for anyone's safety. His lawyers pointed to his difficult childhood and struggles with substance use. In the end, a jury found him guilty of 2 counts of capital homicide and 1 count of attempted homicide. During the trial, friends and family talked about his history of substance use and past run-ins with the law. Those stories painted a picture of someone on a downward path. The jury recommended he spend the rest of his life in prison, but the judge decided he should face the state's highest penalty. Lee's legal team filed several appeals. They argued mistakes happened at the trial and said new facts might clear him. All those requests were denied. In 2009, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals said there was no reason to reopen his case. As the day to carry out the sentence drew near, Lee spoke out against the methods the state planned to use. He said they were cruel and treated people like test subjects. His comments reignited a debate over how such sentences should happen. On the day his sentence was carried out, officials asked if he had any final words. He chose to stay silent. Some people saw that as a last act of defiance. Others felt it showed he had accepted what was coming. Alabama's rules don't say what last meal he requested, so we don't know that detail. Jeffrey Lee's story shows how early struggles, personal issues, and serious wrongdoing can all come together in a tragic way. It raises questions about how we handle the toughest punishments and how much room there is for fairness and compassion in our justice system. But when someone has nothing left to lose, how far might desperation push them? Courtney Larl Lockheart was born in October 1984. He joined the U.S. military in 2003 and served in South Korea and Iraq. He left the service in 2006 after several disciplinary issues. He used the green illegal substance, threatened and struck fellow soldiers, went missing without permission, and hit an officer. For these actions, he received a dishonorable discharge. A defense psychologist said he showed signs of combat-related stress, but he was never formally diagnosed. His IQ was measured at 86, which falls below the average range. In early 2008, Lockheart began a series of planned incidents across Alabama and Georgia. He targeted women in parking lots, held them at gunpoint to take their wallets or purses, and sometimes tried to force them into their cars. On March 4, 2008, he grabbed 18-year-old Auburn University student Lauren Burke and forced her into his car. He drove her around while talking about his personal problems. When she tried to escape, he shot her in the lungs. He left her badly wounded and partly undressed on Alabama State Route 147. She later lost her life at a local hospital. Other incidents included holding people at gunpoint, taking cash from a convenience store and firing his weapon at the clerk, and threatening a woman in a nursing home parking lot in LaGrange, Georgia, until she handed over her purse. In Columbus, Georgia, he threatened another woman by saying he would harm her child if she didn't give him her purse. He also struck a 72-year-old woman in a Walmart parking lot in Noonan, Georgia. These actions ended on March 7, 2008, when police chased him down. During the pursuit, he threw a pistol out the window. After his arrest, officers found Lauren Burke's belongings and other evidence linking him to all of these events. Lockheart was charged with the fatal shooting, taking someone by force, and attempting an unwanted intimate act. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, pointing to his military service and combat stress. His trial began in November 2010. The jury found him guilty on the main counts and recommended that he spend the rest of his life in prison without any chance of early release. Under Alabama law, a judge may impose a harsher sentence than the jury's recommendation. Judge Jacob Walker chose the maximum penalty, citing Lockhart's past record and the serious harm done to the student. The judge also noted that the jury had not been told about Lockhart's earlier military and behavioral problems. Lockhart appealed his conviction. In August 2013, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the verdict, finding no unfair bias or legal error. His further appeals to the Alabama Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court were denied. In September 2015, he filed another petition claiming his lawyers had provided ineffective assistance. That petition was denied in April 2020. He remains in a restricted section of the Hollowman Correctional Facility in Escambia County, Alabama, reserved for inmates serving the most severe sentences. His case has drawn attention because Alabama still allows judges to impose sentences harsher than a jury's recommendation, a practice that most other states have ended. Can someone already serving life still spiral deeper? In the next case, the answer was yes. Cuauhtémoc Henrique Parida was born in May 1976 in Rainbow City, Alabama. He grew up in an area with few resources and little stability. Details about his family and early years are scarce. So much of his childhood remains unclear. On the night of April 15, 1994, Parida and Robert Bryant Melson carried out a holdup at a Popeyes restaurant in Gadsden, Alabama. They slipped in through the back door and confronted 4 employees: Darrell K. Collier, Nathaniel Baker, Bryant Archer, and Tamika Collins. The 2 forced them into the office and demanded cash. Then, they moved the group into the walk-in freezer and opened fire. 3 employees passed from their injuries. Archer was struck 4 times, but managed to survive and call for help. The 2 men escaped with more than $2,100. The community was left in shock. Parida was first given a life term without parole for his part in that incident. While serving that sentence at Hollowman Correctional Facility, he was involved in another fatal episode. On December 11, 1999, he shot a fellow inmate. That event prompted a fresh review of his case. In November 2001, he was found guilty of a capital offense because it followed earlier convictions of a similar nature. Under Alabama law, the court treated this as a capital case and imposed its highest penalty. After receiving that sentence, Parida sought to overturn his convictions through various appeals. In 2003, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals upheld both his original conviction and the highest penalty, finding no errors in the trial. He continued to file motions and petitions. In 2021, he challenged the Escambia Circuit Court's partial dismissal of his Rule 32 petition for post-conviction relief. That challenge remains part of the public record. As of April 2025, Parida remains in prison, awaiting the final outcome of his case. Carrie M Spencer was born in 1980 in Birmingham, Alabama. He grew up in the city's West End neighborhood. Little is known about his early years. On June 17, 2004, Spencer was involved in an encounter that changed everything. That day, he shot and fatally wounded 3 Birmingham police officers: Harley A. Chisholm III, Carlos Owen, and Charles R. Bennett, while they were serving a misdemeanor warrant at a location tied to illegal substance activity in Ensley. Officer Michael Collins survived and later pointed to Spencer as the shooter. Why Spencer acted that way is still not clear. Some accounts say he tried to run when the officers arrived, leading to a confrontation. Others say he was involved with substances at the time. Either way, he faced serious charges: a capital offense for causing 3 officers to lose their lives and an attempt offense for wounding Officer Collins. At trial, his defense argued he fired in self-defense because he feared for his life as the officers approached. The prosecution said he opened fire without warning. The jury found him guilty on all counts. In 2005, Spencer was convicted on 3 counts tied to the officer's passing and 1 count for wounding an officer. The jury recommended life behind bars without any chance of release, but the judge chose a sentence of capital punishment instead. Since the conviction, Spencer has been held at Hollowman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama. He remains there, awaiting the implementation of his sentence. Next is a mother whose choice to raise her son's life insurance ended in a horror story. Christy Michelle Scott was born in August 1978. She lived in Russellville, Alabama, and was a mother. She became known across the country after her 6-year-old autistic son, Mason Scott, lost his life under suspicious circumstances. On August 16, 2008, Christy started a fire in her house while her husband was away. Christy and Mason's older brother escaped the blaze. Mason could not get out and he passed inside. Investigators later discovered that Christy had raised Mason's life insurance policy from $75,000 to $175,000 just 1 day before the fire. That discovery led to her arrest. Everything pointed to money as the reason. Christy took out a much larger insurance policy on Mason right before he passed. The timing made it look like she planned to collect that money. Christy faced 3 serious charges: intentional unaliving for financial gain, by arson, and of a child under 14. At trial, prosecutors showed evidence that Christy started the fire and emphasized the insurance policy. Her defense team said there was not enough proof to show she meant to cause Mason's demise. After 4 weeks in court, the jury found Christy guilty on all 3 charges. During sentencing, the jury voted 7-5 to keep her in prison for life without any possibility of release. Judge Terry Dempsey, however, overruled the jury and gave Christy the harshest punishment possible, meaning she will stay in prison until her life ends. That decision drew attention because it showed that judges in Alabama have the power to set aside what juries recommend in very serious cases. This practice is allowed by law, but it does not happen very often and usually attracts public interest. Now, meet the man whose payment for an hour with a child led to tragedy. Jeremy Tmaine Williams was born in 1984. Over the years, his name became linked to several deeply troubling accusations involving young children. In 2009, he faced serious allegations in Russell County, where he stood trial for harming a minor. After a lengthy legal process that stretched across 3 years, a jury ultimately found him not guilty. But the accusations continued to follow him. Then, in December 2021, a heartbreaking case would bring his name back into the headlines. 5-year-old Kamari Holland was reported missing from her home in Columbus, Georgia. Her mother, Christy Sipple, contacted the police in a panic. A search was launched immediately, but what officers discovered next was devastating. Kamari's body was found in an abandoned home across the state line in Phoenix City, Alabama. The location had once been lived in by none other than Jeremy Williams. A medical examiner later confirmed that Kamari's life had been taken, and there were signs she had experienced severe mistreatment. But it was what investigators uncovered next that made the case even more gut-wrenching. Authorities learned that Kamari's mother had accepted $2,500 from Williams in exchange for an hour alone with her daughter. The betrayal, the grief, and the unimaginable nature of that choice shocked the public. What had already been a heartbreaking case quickly became one of the most disturbing in recent memory. Williams was arrested and charged with the most serious offenses the state could pursue. His trial began in April 2024 and included emotional and graphic testimony. Among the witnesses was a 5-year-old girl who had previously been harmed by Williams. With a support dog at her side, she bravely told her story in front of the jury. Police officers, forensic specialists, and a medical expert also spoke, outlining the evidence and the timeline that led to Williams' arrest. It didn't take long for the jury to reach a decision. After just about 90 minutes of deliberation, they returned a unanimous verdict. Williams was guilty on all counts. The judge then handed down the harshest sentence allowed under Alabama law. Williams was transferred to Hollowman Correctional Facility, where he now remains among others who have received the same outcome, awaiting the final steps in the state's legal process. William Bush was born in 1950 and had a troubled path from a young age. As a young adult, he was convicted of multiple offenses, including theft and a violation of the Federal Firearms Act for possessing a sawed-off shotgun. These incidents added to a growing pattern of run-ins with the law. In the early hours of July 26, 1981, just after 3 a.m., Bush and his partner, Edward Pringle, entered the Magic Mart convenience store on Carter Hill Road in Montgomery, Alabama. Their aim, prosecutors later said, was to take money to fuel ongoing substance use. Inside, the store's cashier, Larry Dominguez, was on shift. His friend, Tony Holmes, was also there. Bush pointed a weapon at Holmes and forced him to the back of the store. When Dominguez opened the bathroom door, Bush fired at both men. As Dominguez stumbled out, already injured, Bush fired again, causing injuries that proved fatal. But Bush didn't stop there. To avoid being recognized or reported, he also targeted Thomas Adams, an employee at a nearby 7-Eleven store. Authorities later said Bush's goal was to ensure no one could identify him or link him to the incident. After the shootings, Bush and Pringle fled the scene. On September 11, 1981, Bush was formally charged with causing a loss of life while taking property. Just over 2 months later, on November 18th, a jury found him guilty. They recommended the highest sentence allowed under Alabama law at the time, a sentence that meant his own life would one day come to an end under court order. But Bush's legal journey was far from over. He appealed the verdict multiple times. In 1984, a federal petition led to a new trial, but that outcome was overturned due to errors in how the jury had been instructed. A third trial took place in 1991, and once again the outcome was the same. The court reaffirmed the original sentence. Since then, all of Bush's appeals have been denied, and as of now, his sentence remains in place. Gregory Hunt was born in 1960 in Alabama. There's little information about his childhood or family. He briefly dated Karen Lane for about a month. Tina Gilliland, a cousin of Hunt and friend of Lane, said they broke up before what happened next. In the early hours of August 2, 1988, Karen Lane's apartment in Jasper, Alabama, became the scene of a horrific incident. She was found after someone had forced her into an unwanted intimate act and then cut off her air supply. Why did this happen? The evidence suggests it was driven by personal anger and a need to control. Hunt and Lane had ended their month-long relationship. That night, Hunt broke into her home. Investigators connected Hunt to the incident through physical traces left at the scene. He was arrested and charged with a top-level felony for taking a life during a break-in and the unwanted intimate act. His trial began in 1990. The prosecution described the forced act, highlighting how tragic it was. The jury found him guilty on 3 counts of the top-level felony. They voted 11-1 for the harshest punishment allowed. The judge agreed and set that punishment. Did Hunt show any regret? Public records do not show him expressing regret during the trial. His defense team challenged the evidence and questioned how the prosecution handled the case. Over the years, Hunt appealed his conviction many times. He said his lawyers were not effective and accused the prosecution of using false evidence. Every appeal failed. His conviction and punishment stayed in place. As of April 2025, Gregory Hunt remains in an Alabama prison, waiting for his sentence to be carried out. His final appeal to the United States Supreme Court was denied, and there are no legal steps left to delay the outcome. But when love turns into obsession, how dangerous can it become? Charles Randall Stewart was born in Alabama. He married Betty Sue Lang. They later divorced. Even after their split, Stewart remained fixated on Lang. That focus grew into a heinous act that shook the community. In 1990, Stewart carried out an act that led to his conviction on 6 counts of first-degree homicide, all tied to ending his ex-wife's life. 4 of those counts were elevated because they happened while he broke into her home. The other 2 counts were elevated because they happened while he took her away against her will. The details are disturbing. Stewart forced his way into Lang's house. He then took her away against her will, moving her from a place she should have felt safe. Ultimately, his actions ended her life. His trial took place in Talladega County, Alabama. The prosecution laid out clear evidence of the break-in, the taking her away, and the fatal outcome. The jury found him guilty on all 6 counts of first-degree homicide. On appeal, it was decided that convicting him on multiple counts for a single action went against the protection against being tried twice for the same act. The higher court threw out 4 of the 6 counts. He remained convicted on 1 count linked to the break-in and 1 count linked to taking her away against her will. Why 6 counts for 1 act? Each count was based on a different legal reason. 4 for ending her life during a break-in, 2 for ending her life while holding her against her will. Since all counts came from the same act, the appellate court saw that multiple convictions violated the double jeopardy rule. Even after the reduction, the case's severity led the jury to recommend the maximum legal sentence by a 10-2 vote. The court agreed. Stewart was given the top legal sentence. It was carried out using the electric chair. As of the latest information, there are no public records of Stewart's final words or any statements he may have made before his last moments. His case shows how personal grudges can spiral into irreversible harm. Now, see how a wrong turn led a theft crew into a fatal AutoZone break-in. Charles Lee Burton was born in 1955. By the early 1990s, he lived in Montgomery, Alabama, and took part in unlawful actions. On August 16, 1991, Burton and 5 others left Montgomery in a blue Chevrolet Caprice. They planned to carry out a theft by force in Birmingham, but took the wrong exit and ended up in Talladega, Alabama. There, they broke into an AutoZone store to take its contents. During that event, the store manager, James Bryan, was shot and later passed away. Burton said he did not pull the trigger and did not see who fired the shot. Why did the law treat Burton as responsible for the shooting even though he did not fire the weapon? Under Alabama law, if someone passes away during a serious offense like a theft by force, everyone involved can face the highest level of charges as if they had caused the loss of life themselves. That rule applied in Burton's case. After the event, authorities arrested Burton and charged him with a top-level offense under Alabama law for a situation in which someone passed away during a theft by force. His trial began in April 1992. Prosecutors said that because Burton took part in the theft by force, he shared responsibility for the fatal outcome. The jury found him guilty and recommended the electric chair procedure as his punishment. The judge agreed and ordered that procedure. Courts reviewed his case in the following years. In 1993, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals confirmed the verdict and the punishment. In 1994, the Alabama Supreme Court did the same. In 1995, the United States Supreme Court declined to hear his appeal. Did Burton's co-defendants receive the same punishment? Interestingly, the man who fired the shot later received a sentence of life without parole. Burton, who did not fire the weapon, stayed in the high-security section for inmates set to face the electric chair procedure. As of April 2025, Charles Lee Burton remains in that high-security section at Hollowman Correctional Facility in Alabama. He has been there since his sentencing in May 1992. He has not yet gone through the electric chair procedure, so there are no recorded final statements. Jeffrey Day Reber was born in 1967 in Alabama. Court papers and testimony show he struggled with substance use and was linked to people in these circles. In later hearings, witnesses described his substance problems and those connections. On April 10, 1990, in Madison County, Alabama, Reber walked into a convenience store. The clerk, 20-year-old Lisa Craig, was working alone. Reber pulled out a .22 caliber handgun and shot her twice, once in the chest and once in the head. Lisa did not survive. At the same time, he took money from the register. At trial, evidence showed Reber had been hanging around that store for days. Witnesses said Lisa seemed tense and worried when she saw him. One even advised her to call the police because he was watching the store. Reber was charged with capital homicide under Alabama law section 13A-5-40AI-2. Since the fatal shooting happened while he grabbed the register's cash. Prosecutors argued he planned it and pointed to how severe it was. The defense asked for a lesser punishment. noting his history of substance struggles and no record of aggression before. The jury found him guilty of capital homicide. During sentencing, they voted 7-5 to have him spend the rest of his life in prison with no chance for early release. Even so, Judge Jerry Blankenship used an Alabama rule that lets judges override a jury's sentencing choice. She imposed the harshest punishment, saying the act was especially cruel because Lisa was already unable to move when he fired the second shot. Why did the judge change the jury's decision? Back then, Alabama law allowed judges to overrule jury recommendations in cases with possible maximum sentences. Judge Blankenship felt the details justified giving Reber the toughest penalty, even though the jury had chosen life in prison. Reber appealed his conviction and sentence. The Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals and then the Alabama Supreme Court both upheld the verdict and punishment. In 1995, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to review his case. After that, Reber filed for relief under Alabama Rule 32. He argued his lawyers had not defended him properly and that the judge's override power was unconstitutional. The trial court denied his petition, and higher courts agreed. As of April 2025, Jeffrey Day Reber remains in the section of the state prison for inmates given the maximum punishment. His final sentence has not been carried out, and no date has been set. Wayne Hollowman Travis was born in 1969. In January 1992, 68-year-old Clarine Haskew was found unresponsive in her home in Evergreen, Alabama. Investigators determined that her home had been broken into, and she had suffered serious physical harm. The evidence showed that she had been struck and then suffocated during the break-in. Wayne Hollowman Travis was identified as the person responsible. He was charged under Alabama law for causing a tragic passing during a first-degree home invasion. The trial took place in Conecuh County. The prosecution brought forward multiple pieces of evidence, including forensic findings and witness statements that connected Travis to what happened. The jury found him guilty. During the sentencing part of the trial, the jury voted 11-1 in favor of the most severe sentence available. The judge followed that recommendation and gave Travis a sentence involving the use of electrocution. Travis later appealed both his conviction and the sentence, arguing that there were mistakes made during the trial. But in 1997, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals confirmed the original decision. The Alabama Supreme Court also supported the outcome of the trial. Over the years, Travis tried to get his sentence overturned through post-conviction petitions, but those efforts were denied. At his sentencing hearing, Travis made a brief statement to the court saying, "I'm sorry, she's dead. I can't do anything about that." This was the only public comment he ever made about what happened. As of April 2025, Wayne Hollowman Travis is still at Holman Prison in Alabama. Now, let's discuss a case where a simple act escalated into something extremely unsettling. Michael Shannon Taylor was born in 1971, but his name would later be tied to a case that deeply unsettled Gadsden, Alabama. On November 4, 1991, an elderly couple, Ernest and Lucille Moore, were found unresponsive in their home. Both had suffered severe injuries. Signs inside the house showed that it had been entered without permission, and several belongings were missing. Investigators quickly believed that someone had come with the intent to take property, and that the situation escalated in a tragic way. Suspicion soon turned toward Michael Shannon Taylor. He was taken into custody and faced 3 of the most serious charges under Alabama law, 2 connected to what happened during the unlawful entry, and 1 for the loss of 2 lives in a single act. At trial, prosecutors presented physical evidence linking Taylor to the scene and the missing items. Witness testimony and timelines helped build the full story of what happened that night. After hearing all the evidence, the jury found Taylor guilty on all counts. When it came to sentencing, they recommended the highest penalty available, and the judge agreed. Taylor later challenged the verdict, raising concerns about how jurors were selected and whether bias had played a role. His appeals led to careful reviews, but in the end, the higher courts upheld both his conviction and the sentence. As of April 2025, Michael Shannon Taylor is still being held at Hollowman Correctional Facility in Alabama. Christopher D Barber was born in 1971 in Alabama. On March 21, 1992, in Montgomery, Alabama, 16-year-old William Roberts came home and found his mother, Thelma Bishop Roberts, unresponsive. She was lying on the floor without clothes, with a plastic trash bag over her head and a sharp object sticking out from her chest. The autopsy showed she had been stabbed 9 times. 2 of those injuries were so forceful that the blade went all the way through her body and pierced her back. She also had serious swelling around her eyes, which was caused by being hit multiple times. Some of her jewelry was also missing from the home. Barber later admitted to being involved. He told investigators that he, Chris Hester, and Mike Mitchell had entered Thelma Roberts' home, drank beer, and then carried out a series of serious actions that included forcing themselves on her, taking valuables, setting fire to parts of the house, and stabbing her. Barber said he was the one who used the sharp object after Hester had harmed her. But later, Barber took back his statement, saying he only confessed because he felt pressured and that it wasn't true. No physical evidence or witnesses directly tied him to what happened. Barber was charged with a high-level offense that included causing someone's passing during other serious illegal acts like breaking into a home, harming someone, and setting a fire. A jury found him responsible and, by a vote of 10-2, recommended the highest possible punishment. The judge agreed and gave him the harshest punishment. The court said that the nature of the case was especially severe and that the negative details outweighed any background factors that might have helped him. His sentence was later reviewed by higher courts and confirmed. Barber then filed more appeals, trying to get his conviction overturned. These were denied. In 2001, a date was set for the punishment to be carried out, but Barber submitted new motions, claiming he had fresh evidence. In 2024, a federal court in Alabama found that Barber met the requirements for what's called an actual innocence gateway claim. This allowed his appeal to be looked at again, this time with a full review of the new information he presented. As of April 2025, Christopher D. Barber is in prison in Alabama. His case is under active review based on the federal court's decision to take a closer look at his innocence claim. Willie R. Burgess Jr. was born in Alabama in 1976. He grew up in a home that lacked stability and support. His father was mostly not around, and his mother had a hard time keeping things steady for the family. Burgess left school during the 9th grade. His early life was shaped by the absence of guidance and a difficult home environment. On the night of November 15, 1993, in Decatur, Alabama, 17-year-old Burgess entered the home of 75-year-old Louise Crow. He had done some yard work for her in the past, so he was familiar with her routine. Burgess planned to steal from her because he believed she kept money inside the house. Things did not go as expected. During the break-in, Crow was physically harmed. Burgess then took a small amount of money and left. The seriousness of what happened shocked the local community. Because of his previous connection to Crow, the police quickly began looking at Burgess as a possible suspect. He was taken into custody soon after. During questioning, Burgess admitted what he had done and gave information that only the person responsible would know. He was charged with a serious offense involving someone getting hurt during a theft. In court, the prosecution used Burgess's confession and physical evidence from the scene to support their case. His defense team pointed to his troubled past and the fact that he had never been in serious trouble before. They asked the court to take those things into account. A common question during the trial was whether his age and background would affect the jury's decision. The jury was told that Burgess was just 17 at the time and didn't have a history of serious legal issues. However, what happened was considered too severe to be overlooked. The jury found Burgess guilty of the most serious charge. During the next phase of the trial, where they decided the punishment, the jury voted 11-1 in favor of the harshest sentence available. The judge agreed with the jury's recommendation and officially gave that sentence on August 24, 1994. Burgess later appealed. He said his trial lawyer didn't do enough to help him and that the court didn't properly consider all the factors from his background. But the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals said the trial was handled fairly and kept the decision in place. The Alabama Supreme Court also agreed. When Burgess tried to take his case to the U.S. Supreme Court, they decided not to review it. In 2003, he filed another petition. Again, he claimed that his lawyer had not done a good job and that the court ignored important details that could have helped him. The court dismissed the petition, saying there wasn't enough evidence to prove that his legal defense had failed or that any mistakes changed the outcome. As of 2025, Willie R Burgess Jr is still in custody under the same sentence in Alabama. No date has been set for any final steps, and there are no public records of him making any final statements. Corey Shirro Smith was born in 1976 and grew up in Alabama. On September 1, 1995, Smith was found guilty of a very serious offense involving Kimberly Ann Brooks. This case was treated with the highest level of severity by the court because it happened while he was forcibly taking her against her will. The jury came to a unanimous decision and recommended the most severe sentence allowed by law. The judge agreed with the jury's recommendation and finalized the sentence on September 14, 1995. Smith had once threatened Kimberly Brooks, who was the mother of his one-year-old daughter, saying, "If you ever leave me, I'll do something terrible to you." Sadly, he followed through on that threat. After finding out that Kimberly had moved on and was living with someone else, Smith forced her into his car while carrying a firearm. He then shot her multiple times in a remote area, only stopping when he ran out of ammunition. The situation was extremely volatile and included forcefully taking her, causing physical harm, trying to stop her from breathing, and setting her body on fire. During the second part of his trial, where the court considers punishment, Smith's defense team shared information about his difficult past and possible mental health challenges, but the prosecution presented strong arguments showing how planned and cruel the incident was. After considering everything, the court decided that the harsh details of the event outweighed any background factors that might reduce responsibility. So, the judge upheld the jury's decision. Smith appealed to a higher court, but they confirmed the original verdict. The Alabama Supreme Court also supported the sentence. Over the years, Smith tried to challenge the decision through other legal options, but those were also denied. He is still held at Hollowman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama. Albert Mack III was born around 1974 in Tuscaloosa County, Alabama. His name became known after a tragic incident in 1993 that led to a serious legal case and eventually a sentence of capital punishment. In 1993, Mack became involved in a late-night attempt to take property, an act that quickly spiraled into something far worse. By the end of that night, Patrick Corey Hollowman had lost his life. Because the loss occurred during an act of unlawful taking, Mack was charged, but the full story of what unfolded that night remains unclear. Public records offer few specifics about how the confrontation began or exactly how it turned fatal, but the way the case was prosecuted leaves little doubt. This was seen as an intentional act, one that crossed a line no one could undo. Mack's trial was held in Tuscaloosa Circuit Court. The jury found him guilty. When it came to deciding the punishment, the jury voted 10-2 in favor of the most severe penalty. The judge accepted this decision, and on February 23, 1996, Mack was officially sentenced. His conviction and sentence were reviewed by higher courts. In 1998, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the decision. A year later, the Alabama Supreme Court also agreed with the outcome. Over the years, Mack filed several appeals, asking the court to reconsider parts of the case. In one of the most recent updates from 2024, the state of Alabama challenged a decision made by the Tuscaloosa Circuit Court that had partly favored Mack's request for post-conviction relief. The Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed this appeal, but the public records don't say what the final decision was. As of the most recent updates, Albert Mack III is still in prison in Alabama. He is one of 4 people from Tuscaloosa County currently in that situation. There is no public information about any scheduled date for the punishment to be carried out, or if he has made any final statements. Shonelle Andre Jackson was born on May 30th, 1978, in Alabama. There isn't much public information about his early life or family, but during later court proceedings, his defense team said that Jackson's father had a history of being in prison and struggling with substance use. They suggested this unstable background may have shaped the way Jackson grew up. In 1997, when Jackson was 19 years old, something serious happened in Montgomery, Alabama. A man named Lefrick Moore lost his life during a theft that turned into a massacre. At first, Jackson said he didn't know the people involved and claimed he wasn't there when it happened. But during questioning, a detective told him that his fingerprints were found on a Dairy Queen cup inside Moore's stolen vehicle. That wasn't actually true. It was said to pressure Jackson into talking. After hearing that, Jackson admitted he had been with the group earlier that day. He later confessed to being present when everything happened. He said he had a .380 handgun with him at the time. But was Jackson the one who caused Moore's passing? That part is still unclear. One of the jurors from the trial, Jan Burks, later said she wasn't sure if Jackson was the one who fired the weapon. The evidence didn't make it completely clear. In February 1998, Jackson went to trial. He faced charges related to the theft and Moore's passing. The state's lawyers argued that Jackson's role in what happened was serious enough to ask for the most extreme sentence. Jackson's defense team didn't present much in terms of reasons to reduce the sentence. His mother spoke in court and asked for her son's life to be spared. In the end, all 12 jurors agreed that Jackson should spend the rest of his life in prison with no chance of release. But the judge in the case, William Gordon, had the final say. At that time, Alabama law allowed judges to overrule a jury's sentencing decision in these kinds of cases. Judge Gordon decided to go against the jury's recommendation. He gave Jackson the most severe sentence. Jackson's lawyers didn't stop fighting. They filed several appeals. They said his trial lawyers didn't do enough to bring up important information, like his difficult childhood and family issues. That could have helped his case. They also said some jurors didn't reveal important facts during the jury selection process. One juror, for example, owned guns. Another had a connection to the Montgomery Police Department. Even with all these claims, higher courts upheld Jackson's conviction and sentence. The Alabama Supreme Court did send the case back at one point to take another look at how Jackson's statements to police were handled. But in the end, the original sentence remained in place. As of April 2025, Shonelle Andre Jackson is still in Hollowman Correctional Facility in Alabama. He is still using legal options to try and change his conviction and sentence.